just taxing the really rich people just slightly more will increase the amount of money the government would have. So there are a million of reasons that all of us would benefit from a more equal society. And this idea of one person, one vote, and if you make it to €1, one vote, then you don't have a democracy anymore.
Inequality is on the rise and more people are falling into poverty as the super rich are getting richer. Frustration is also rising, even among those at the top. Many of them are calling for higher taxes. One group is Tax Me Now, and we're joined now by Sebastian Klein, who's one of these rich people calling for change. He's the co-founder of the company Blinkist, based here in Berlin. Sebastian, thanks for joining us. I'm going to get a little bit nosy and ask you the first question, which is how much tax do you pay now, and what do you think it should be?
So right now, I'm paying, as everyone else does, a lot of taxes on my income from work. But when it comes to capital gains and money that I get out of the wealth I own, then it's much less. And I think that should be the opposite.
And Tax Me Now's team has some people on it who inherited their fortunes. But let's find out a little bit more about you. How did you make your millions and what did you do with it?
So I'm an entrepreneur. My money comes mostly from an exit of one of the companies I started. So I didn't inherit it, but still I feel I had a much more privileged position in this society than most people do. So it was easier for me to acquire wealth. So even though I didn't just inherit my money, I still feel it's an unjust situation where, wealthy people should be taxed more.
Let's get into some of these nerdy details, so to speak. What kind of tax policy changes is Tax Me Now asking for? Are we talking about not just a tax on income, estates, capital income? What are we talking about here?
As Tax Me Now, we're not politicians, so we don't propose what the laws exactly should be looking like. We just want to use our position as privileged people to say that we feel the situation is unjust, where we see that like people who have who live from their income have a tax of, let's say, roughly 50% of what they earn, they have to pay as taxes. And in the last 30 years, the taxes for people who are wealthy, like wealth tax, has been or is no longer in existence in Germany. And the inheritance tax, have been lots of changes, and so the effective tax that people pay who live from their wealth is just much lower. And as you said, there's wealth tax is one important thing that could be changed, but also inheritance tax is important, capital gains. So there are many different ways to do it, and we just want to raise awareness that the situation overall should be changed. But as I said, we're not politicians, so we don't say this is the right way how to tackle it.
There are a few different ways, like we've discussed already, that laws could be changed. So that aside, I'm wondering if you could illustrate for us what kind of revenues could some of these taxes bring in? Basically, as a businessman yourself, what has been left on the table in the past few years, given the current situation?
So the numbers are really big, and like for me, the most important number is always to look at how much wealth do we have in a country like Germany. And it's just roughly, we don't know exactly, because since we don't have a wealth tax, there are no exact numbers, but the rough figure is 20 trillion. So there's a lot of money there. And we just see at the moment that the German government always talks about, we don't have money for better schools, we don't have money for better railways, we don't have money for this and that. And the ballpark number that the government has per year is 500 billion. So there's a huge gap in just taxing the really rich people just slightly more will increase the amount of money the government would have per year just dramatically, because 100 billion more per year, that's a lot of money if you talk about building better schools, building better infrastructure. But in terms of how much wealth is actually there and how much new wealth is created every year, it's a very small number compared to that.
It's easy for someone like me to say, oh, I want richer people to pay more taxes. But how do you make the sales pitch to your fellow wealthy people when trying to convince them that higher taxes for people in your tax bracket or their tax bracket are a good thing?
I think for wealthy people, there are so many reasons to also be for a more egalitarian society and like a smaller inequality. There's so much science about showing that the overall economy is stronger, grows stronger as well if you have a less inequality in terms of how much wealth people have. In more unequal societies, you have higher crime rates, people are less healthy, they live shorter. So there are a million of reasons that all of us would benefit from a more equal society. And I mean, we're not talking about everyone has to have the same amount of wealth. That's not what we're talking about. It's just decreasing the level of inequality. And personally, I also think even if you're coming from a very egoistic perspective as a rich person and you just want to maintain your status in the society, I think it's also smart to lobby for a little bit less inequality, because the risk is if things get worse and worse, then there will be this big bang where people just won't accept the status quo anymore, and then probably all your wealth is gone. And as I say, even from an egoistic perspective, I wouldn't want that.
How many millionaires, let's say, have signed on to the initiative at Tax Me Now, and what's the goal? Is it just awareness, or is there a broader goal that viewers should be aware of?
So right now it's like a few dozen, I don't know the exact number, a few dozen people who are part of Tax Me Now. And the core idea is to say that, I mean, part of this inequality problem is that people who are wealthy and are privileged, they have they get much more attention from politicians, from media. So, we have all these privileges and we want to use them to raise awareness and to say we think something's wrong in society and we think it should be changed. I don't know, maybe the course is going to change in the next few years, but right now we really just want to use this position we have to raise awareness so something can change. Because if a few dozen average people, build such a network, probably they won't get as much attention from media and politicians if they do talk about inequality.
We've talked a little bit about politics in this conversation so far, but I'm curious, how does wealth distribution, especially the concentration of a lot of wealth among very few people, affect politics in your view?
So my personal view is that democracy and extreme concentration of wealth doesn't work together. So we have this idea of one person, one vote. And if you make it to €1, one vote, then you don't have a democracy anymore. And I mean, I just personally can also say, being wealthy, I have much easier access to politicians, to media. I can use money to lobby for my interests. I can think of a reality I want to have in the society, and then just use my money to create that reality. And if I look in the German constitution, it says that everyone should have the same rights, but also the same possibilities to thrive in the society. And I think we can also see now with the rise of populist parties that many people, feel that something isn't working in this democracy. And I'm pretty convinced that it has to do with this extreme concentration of wealth.
One question that comes to mind when I'm reading about initiatives like Tax Me Now, or there are other initiatives like Patriotic Millionaires, for example, is why not just give away more money on an individual level? There are countries that have fairly tricky tax systems. Folks, especially wealthy people, can hire very smart accountants to help them maximize their tax returns. You could do the opposite of that and give more on an individual level to the government, or pay more to the government. So why not take that route? Why call for a broader initiative like this?
I mean, it's two different things. Many of us do exactly what you say on a personal level. So we donate, or even say we don't want to keep our wealth and give away most of it. That's what many of us do on an individual level. But as an organization, Tax Me Now, we just want to look at this more systemic change, because the individual decision is important, but it doesn't, that's not how you get a systems change. And so I would say it's just two different things, and both are important.
Most of Europe doesn't have a wealth tax. We have a map here of the countries that don't. So if a wealth tax were passed here in Germany, for example, wouldn't a savvy millionaire or billionaire with one of these smart accountants just move their money to a different country?
As far as I haven't tried it, so I can't tell you exactly. But as far as I know, it's much harder these days to move money from Germany to other countries. Like a couple of decades ago, many wealthy people would go to places like Switzerland to avoid taxes here. But as far as I know, there have been important changes in the law since then, so it's much harder to do that. And we also see from countries like Norway, which introduced the wealth tax, that you will always have people who, try to avoid by all means being taxed. You will always have them, but it's only a relatively small number. And the argument is just used to get people afraid. There's some of these arguments circulating with this goal of getting people afraid. For instance, also this threat of rising unemployment by wealth taxes. This is something that people like to use because then it gets the average person afraid. Maybe wealth tax is not a good idea because then we'll higher unemployment. But if you look at the data, it's just not true. Like if you look at the data, how higher taxes on wealthy people and unemployment correlate, then you will find it's a negative correlation. So if you tax rich people more, then you have lower levels of unemployment.
Staying with this kind of same theme, several countries have abolished their wealth taxes in recent decades. France in 2018 abolished part of its net wealth tax. Germany got rid of its wealth tax in 1997. And both of these countries' economies are the top two in the European Union. How do you make the argument for a move like this? Because the economies seem to be doing fairly well here. So what's missing? What's the missing link in your view?
I mean, there are also studies that say the German economy could be 6% bigger if the inequality level wouldn't be as extreme as it is right now. And the economy hasn't developed. Like Germany has a big economy, but the development in the last years, I don't think is particularly great. And one aspect maybe I want to highlight is that part of this inequality also means that we have a lot of people who live in poverty, who don't get access to good education, who won't be like the qualified workforce of the future. At the same time, we have this demographic trend that like the German population is getting older. So many of these rich people, they depend on a qualified workforce in the future. And if you don't make sure that many people in the society, have the option of like thriving and getting qualified and building like a small wealth, then that's also going to harm all the companies. And it's, of course, also going to harm the people who own the companies.
I was reading a report from the OECD about net wealth taxes, which, to be fair, was mixed, and it depended on the web that was being weaved in an individual country's tax laws. But part of the concern there was in the details that, for example, a heavy net wealth tax, which is unlinked to income, might discourage entrepreneurship. You're an entrepreneur. What do you can say to concerns like these, that a higher wealth tax would slow down investment or entrepreneurship, these kinds of concerns?
As I said, I'm not a politician, so I don't know how to solve it exactly, but I know that these things have always been solved in the past. And for me, it's just the inequality crisis for me is on the same magnitude as the climate crisis. So I'm pretty convinced that if we don't get this problem solved, then like the democracies will fall apart. So I think this problem that you mentioned, that's a detail, and I'm pretty sure it can be solved. And I think it's a much smaller problem than the inequality problem. So I would, even if it takes a while to tackle these problems, and even if it might happen that, initially you will have like a little bit less investments, I don't think that's a reason against this change, because that's so important.
Right. But bringing yourself back to when you were co-founding the company Blinkist, do you think that this kind of technicality was something that you had in mind? Help folks, I guess, understand the mind of an entrepreneur when they're thinking about an idea like this and they want to get a company off the ground. Is this something you're taking on board, or not maybe as much as some people might fear?
So from my own experience, I'm not from a wealthy family. I didn't inherit a fortune. So I had, when we started the company, I didn't have any money basically. And it was extremely hard to do that. It was a lot of work and a lot of risk to build that company. And and I mean, a lot of people who are starting as rich inheritance, they have a much easier time starting a company or just, inheriting a company. And then I see like the biggest part of our population is less privileged than I am. I already started as a, upper middle class person. So most of the people have a much harder time starting their own business, like being independent and being innovative. And for me, like I would want an economy where more people have the opportunity to be entrepreneurial and start their own businesses. I think that's going to be the easier transition also to a climate friendly economy. It's a much more resilient economy than having these old big tankers of organizations. So in my mind, less inequality will lead to a much more entrepreneurial, much more innovative economy.
Sebastian Klein, he is a millionaire calling for higher taxes with the group Tax Me Now. He's based in Berlin. Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us here at DW.